Ian, she's out cold, the waitress whispered, nodding toward the woman slumped over the bar counter in a silk blouse and heels that probably cost more than his month's rent. Ian Westbrook looked up from the greasy plate of half-eaten fries in front of him. His 6-year-old son, Milo, sat beside him at the corner booth, legs swinging, coloring a superhero in the kids' menu with the only working crayon left. Ian wiped his hands on a napkin. She drunk, the waitress shrugged. 2 glasses of wine, maybe 3. She came in alone. Didn't say much. It was almost midnight. The diner was nearly empty, the usual late-night crowd already gone. Ian glanced outside. Rain streaked the windows, and the sidewalks glistened under the dim street lamps. This wasn't the part of town you wanted to be wandering alone at night, especially not dressed like that. Ian stood and walked over. "Miss," she stirred slightly, her head lifting. Her eyes were a striking gray, unfocused but alert enough to meet his. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, and a strand of damp hair clung to her cheek. "I'm fine," she said softly, but her voice cracked halfway through. "You don't look fine. You got someone coming to get you." She blinked at him slowly. "No, I just needed air." "I'll call a car." Ian glanced down at the cracked screen of her phone. "Yeah, that thing's dead." She looked down, almost surprised to see it in her hand. Ian hesitated. "I can walk you. It's not safe out there alone. I don't even know your name." "Ian." "And that's my son, Milo," he said, jerking his chin toward the booth. "I'm not a creep. I'm just a dad trying to make sure you don't end up in tomorrow's news." She looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. "All right." Just to the corner. Ian grabbed Milo's raincoat, helped him into it, and nodded to the waitress. "Thanks, Tanya. I'll be back tomorrow for the night shift." They stepped outside. The woman shivered, so Ian shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It was too big on her, but she pulled it close anyway. "You live nearby?" he asked. She nodded. "Just a few blocks." Milo skipped ahead of them, splashing in puddles. "I'm Fiona," she said finally, glancing at him. "Nice to meet you, Fiona. You okay?" She hesitated. "It's been a long week." He didn't push. People who said that often meant more than they said. They walked in silence for a minute. Fiona glanced sideways at him. "Do you always eat at that diner with your son at midnight?" "When I can't afford a sitter and I'm too tired to cook," Ian said, no shame in his tone. "He likes the pancakes." Fiona looked at Milo, who grinned at her and held up his drawing. "That's a superhero," he said proudly. "His name is Mega Milo." "You're a good artist," she said, smiling. Ian looked at her. "You don't seem like the type to end up alone in a diner." She gave a soft laugh. "What type do I seem like?" "The kind with a driver. Or at least a charger." She laughed again, and this time it was fuller, real. "Maybe, but sometimes I like disappearing." They reached an apartment building that didn't match her heels at all. Ian raised an eyebrow. "Here, for tonight," she said, eyes meeting his. "Thanks for walking me." Ian nodded. "Anytime." She reached out, touching his arm. "You didn't have to, I know." She looked at Milo. "Good night, Mega Milo." "Good night, lady," Milo chirped. Fiona disappeared inside, and Ian stood there for a moment, wondering why his heart was beating a little faster. The next night she was back. Same booth. Different clothes, still expensive, still looking like she didn't belong in a place with flickering lights and sticky menus. Ian was bussing tables when he spotted her. "You again," he said, coming over. Fiona smiled. "I liked the pancakes." He gave a laugh. "You came back for diner pancakes and maybe to say thank you properly." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small box. Ian frowned. "I don't need it's not money," she said, opening it. Inside was a brand new phone charger. Ian blinked. "You bought a charger?" "3, actually, just in case." He grinned despite himself. "That's weirdly thoughtful." "I figured it was the least I could do." Milo ran up, his face lighting up. "You came back," Fiona smiled. "I couldn't leave without seeing what Mega Milo was drawing next." They talked a little more that night. Fiona asked questions about Ian's job, about Milo's school, about how someone like him ended up working night shifts and raising a kid alone. "My wife left when Milo was 3, Ian said, not bitter, just stating facts. "Said she wasn't cut out for it. I used to be an EMT, but the hours didn't work. So now I do whatever pays." Fiona's expression softened. "You deserve more," he shrugged. "Deserve doesn't pay rent." She stayed until closing, then walked out with them again. That became a pattern. One night, 2 weeks later, Fiona sat across from Ian in the booth, her heels kicked off under the table and Milo asleep with his head resting in her lap. She gently stroked his hair. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said quietly. "Sure. Do you ever think about what you'd do if you weren't stuck?" Ian looked at her. "I don't feel stuck," she raised an eyebrow. "I mean, yeah, it's hard, but Milo's happy, and I'm doing the best I can. That's enough for now." Fiona stared at him for a long time. "You're the kind of man people write stories about," Ian laughed. "I'm just a guy who makes a mean grilled cheese and can change a diaper in under 30 seconds. Fiona leaned closer. "You're more than that." He looked at her. "You're not just a woman who forgets her charger." She smiled, but something flickered behind her eyes. "Come with me tomorrow," she said suddenly. "Just for a day. Let me show you something." Ian hesitated. "Where?" "Trust me." He looked at Milo, then back at her. "Only if you promise we'll be back by dinner." "I promise." He didn't know then that the next day would change everything, and that the woman he'd walked home 2 weeks ago was hiding a world he'd never imagined. Ian stood outside the diner the next morning, Milo's small hand tucked into his. The air was crisp and bright, the kind of rare, clear day that made the city seem sharper, newer. He glanced down at his son, who was busy inspecting a pebble on the sidewalk. A sleek black car rolled up to the curb, the kind of car that didn't belong in this neighborhood. The back door opened, and Fiona stepped out wearing jeans, white sneakers, and a navy coat belted at the waist. She looked nothing like the woman who had once slumped at a bar counter, lost in thought. Ian's brow lifted. "Nice ride." She tilted her head slightly. "It's borrowed." "From who?" "Batman," Fiona laughed, then knelt beside Milo. "You ready for an adventure, Mega Milo?" He nodded, clutching his superhero drawing in one hand. Ian hesitated. "Where are we going? You'll see." They followed her into the car. The leather smelled new, and the seats adjusted automatically when Ian sat. He blinked at the control panel glowing on the dash. "Borrowed from Bruce Wayne, confirmed," he muttered. Fiona didn't answer. She gave a small nod to the driver, a man with silver hair and a quiet presence. They drove for over an hour, through winding streets and past neighborhoods Ian had never set foot in. Eventually, the city gave way to open-space gravel roads, tall trees, and buildings set far back from the road, all glass and steel and angles. The car slowed in front of a long, gated drive. At the end of it stood a house not a house. Ian corrected himself, a modern palace of stone and glass, with a reflecting pool in front and a view that stretched over rolling hills. He stared out the window. "This is not a pancake place." Fiona turned to him. "Come on. I want to show you something." Ian opened his door slowly. "Milo stays with me, of course." They walked toward the house. A woman met them at the entrance, greeting Fiona with a quiet nod before opening the massive double doors. Inside, it was like stepping into another world. High ceilings, polished concrete floors, walls lined with art that probably cost more than Ian's annual salary. Milo wandered toward a sculpture that looked like a twisted tree made of glass. "Careful, bud," Ian said, gently guiding him back. Fiona led them through the house and out onto a terrace where a long table had been set for three, overlooking a manicured garden and a private vineyard stretching into the distance. Ian stared. "Is this your house?" Fiona looked out over the view. "One of them." He turned to her sharply. "What?" She didn't flinch. "I wanted you to see it before I explained." "Explained what?" "That I wasn't completely honest with you at the diner. I'm not who I let you believe I was." Ian folded his arms. "No kidding." She stepped closer. "I didn't lie, I just left things out. Like the fact that you live in a Bond villain's lair." She gave a faint smile, but it faded quickly. "My family owns a global real estate firm. I took it over 4 years ago. I manage the company now. I'm the CEO." Ian blinked, then turned to look at the house again. "So this isn't borrowed?" "No, but I didn't want you to see this version of me first. I wanted to be seen without all the noise." He sat down slowly, still watching her. "Why me?" Fiona joined him at the table. "Because you're the first person I've met in years who didn't want anything from me. You didn't care who I was. You cared that I got home safe, and you didn't flinch when I told you I had a bad week." Milo climbed into a chair beside Ian, already eyeing the basket of fresh rolls on the table. Ian kept his voice low. "This is a lot, Fiona, I know. But I didn't want to keep it from you forever. I just needed to be sure. Sure about what? That what I felt when I was with you wasn't just because I was exhausted or hiding, that it was real. Ian looked at her for a long time. And is it? She met his eyes. You tell me. He exhaled slowly, then looked over at Milo, who had pulled the cloth napkin into his lap like a little prince. My life's not built for this kind of world, Ian said. Fiona leaned forward. Then let me build something new with you. Before Ian could answer, a man stepped onto the terrace, tall, sharp-suited, with a knowing expression. He walked straight up to Fiona. I didn't realize you had company, he said. Fiona stood. I thought you were still in Tokyo. I came back early. Board meeting's been moved. Ian stood too, instinctively placing a hand on Milo's shoulder. The man glanced at Ian, then at Fiona. You're not seriously still wasting time on this? Fiona's voice dropped. Not here. You've got a family name to protect. This isn't a charity project. Ian's jaw tightened. Excuse me, Fiona stepped between them. Graham, go inside. He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You think this is going to work? You're risking everything. Fiona didn't look away. Then it must be worth it. Graham left without another word, the tension still thick in the air after he disappeared inside. Ian looked at her. Who was that? My cousin, and part of the board. He thinks he knows what's best. Ian ran a hand through his hair. Well, he's not wrong about one thing. We're from different galaxies. Fiona didn't blink. Then let me meet you halfway. Ian shook his head. You don't understand, this isn't just about me. I've got Milo to think about. I can't bring chaos into his life. She stepped closer. And I can't walk away from someone who made me feel more human than anyone in the last 5 years. Ian looked at her, torn between instinct and something deeper, something that had been building quietly with every late-night conversation and small look exchanged across diner booths. I need time, he said. Fiona nodded. I'll wait, Ian, however long it takes. He reached for Milo's hand. Come on, bud, let's go. As they walked back toward the car, Ian didn't look back, but he felt her eyes on him the whole way, and deep down, something had already shifted. Ian didn't sleep that night, not really. Every time he closed his eyes, Fiona's voice echoed in his head. Let me build something new with you. He sat on the couch long after Milo had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling of their tiny apartment, the hum of the fridge the only sound in the dark. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Fiona, the woman who'd sat beside him night after night in a crumbling diner booth, was a billionaire. Not just rich empire-owning, boardroom-commanding, chauffeured car kind of wealthy, but that wasn't what unsettled him most. It was that she'd chosen to walk into his world and stay. She could have disappeared into her gated estate the moment she sobered up that first night. Instead, she came back. Again, and again. He didn't understand it. By the time morning came, Ian was still no closer to an answer. He dropped Milo off at school, then drove to the loading dock of the warehouse where he'd picked up extra shifts since cutting back at the diner. Boxes didn't ask questions. They didn't tell you deserved more or look at you like you were the only real thing in their world. He didn't hear from Fiona for 3 days, not a call, not a note. Ian didn't know if he felt relieved or disappointed. On the 4th day, Milo came out of school holding something small and glossy in both hands. Daddy, he said, eyes wide, someone gave this to me. It was an envelope. Inside was a ticket, an invitation, really to an event at the Museum of Modern Art, a gala, the kind of thing you only saw in movies. Embossed at the bottom was Fiona's name as the host. Ian stared at it, then down at Milo. Who gave you this? She was tall, had red lipstick. Said it was from Miss Fiona. Ian turned the card over. Written in neat, slanted script were 5 words, bring Milo, dress how you want. That night, he stood in front of his closet holding the only suit he owned. He hadn't worn it since his sister's wedding. The pants were a bit tighter around the waist, and the sleeves didn't quite reach his wrists anymore. Milo, in a slightly wrinkled button-down, stood on a chair at the bathroom sink, trying to flatten his hair with water. You look like a superhero undercover, Ian said. Milo grinned. You look like someone important. Ian didn't feel important. He felt like a fraud walking into a world that didn't belong to him, but he went anyway. The museum was lit like a dream, all soft golds and shimmering glass. Outside, a line of black cars dropped off guests who stepped out in silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Ian parked around the corner and walked in with Milo's hand in his. A woman at the entrance looked them over, then checked the guest list. Mr. Westbrook. Right this way. Inside, the main hall had been transformed. Sculptures and paintings stood in curated clusters under warm spotlights. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres Ian couldn't pronounce. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Ian felt the weight of every stare as they entered. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Then he saw her. Fiona stood under a tall installation of suspended glass feathers, wearing a midnight blue gown that shimmered like the ocean under moonlight. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck, and a single sapphire hung from a chain around her throat. She looked at him like he was the only person in the room. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said when he reached her. "I almost didn't," Ian admitted. Then I remembered Milo's never been to an art museum. Fiona crouched to meet Milo's eyes. "Do you want to see something special?" He nodded, and she led them to a smaller room off the main hall. Inside, a single sculpture stood on a pedestal, a twisted loop of steel and glass, catching the light in a way that made it seem to glow from within. "My mother made this," Fiona said softly. "It's the only piece of hers I keep in public view." Ian looked at her. "She was an artist, she was everything," Fiona said. "But she never fit into this world the way my father planned. She died when I was 17. Ian didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Fiona turned to Milo. "This is called the anchor." She said it reminded her of the people who keep us steady when everything else feels like it's drifting. Milo stared at it, then looked up at his dad. "Like Daddy," Fiona smiled. "Exactly like Daddy." They walked back into the main hall, and a man in a navy blazer approached them. "Miss Kensington, we're ready for your speech." Fiona looked at Ian. "Will you stay?" He hesitated. "I don't want to be a distraction." "You're the only part of this that feels real," she said. "That's the opposite of a distraction." She kissed Milo's cheek, then stepped up to the podium as the room quieted. Ian stood at the back, one hand on his son's shoulder, listening. Fiona's voice was clear and calm. "My mother once told me that legacy isn't about what we leave behind, it's about who we become while we're here. For years, I thought I had to become the version of myself that made sense to everyone else. But lately, I've realized that the most powerful thing I can do is be honest, even when it's messy, even when it's complicated." She looked up then, eyes locking with Ian's. "I believe in building a world where we're not expected to hide the parts of ourselves that feel too small or too big for the rooms we walk into." The applause that followed was polite, elegant, but Ian didn't clap. He just watched her. Later, as the crowd thinned and coats were collected, Fiona found him standing near one of the paintings, Milo asleep in his arms. "I meant what I said," she told him. "All of it." Ian looked down at the boy in his arms. "This isn't a life I'm used to. But it doesn't have to be one you're afraid of." He met her gaze. "You sure you want to deal with the reality of me? No promises, no ease, just early mornings and sticky fingers and rent that's never quite on time." Fiona stepped closer. "I've dealt with worse. I've lived through worse, and none of it made me feel more alive than standing in a diner with you." He studied her face, looking for any trace of doubt. He didn't see it. "I can't promise anything," he said, "but I'll try." She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's all I've ever wanted." They stood there for a long moment, the city glittering beyond the tall windows, the night wrapping around them like a secret. And for the first time in years, Ian didn't feel like he was barely holding everything together. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was starting to build something real. The knock came just after 7, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet of the apartment. Ian had just finished folding laundry, Milo's blue socks still warm in his hands. The boy sat cross-legged on the floor, building a tower out of mismatched plastic blocks. Ian opened the door cautiously. Fiona stood there, her coat wet from the light drizzle outside, her hair pulled back in a loose braid. She didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped in, her eyes never leaving his. "I didn't want to send another message through your son." Ian closed the door behind her. "Did you walk here?" "I needed the air." He glanced at the window. "It's raining." "I don't mind." She looked around the apartment slowly, taking in the cracked molding, the scuffed hardwood floors, the framed picture of Milo's stick figure family taped to the fridge. Her attention lingered on the small bookshelf stacked with paperbacks and a dented coffee mug filled with loose change. "I thought you might not want to see me again," she said. "I thought about it," Ian admitted. "But then Milo asked if you were coming over for dinner, and I didn't know what to tell him." Fiona stepped closer. "You could have told him the truth." "Which part?" "That you're someone who makes decisions in boardrooms while I can't even decide if I should fix the heater or buy groceries this week. You think I care about that. I think you don't understand what it's like to carry everything alone and still come up short." Fiona's expression didn't shift. "You're right. I've never lived in a place where the heat makes a difference between sleeping or freezing, but I've carried things too, Ian. I've just had the money to hide it." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the couch. "Sit. I'll make coffee." While he moved through the kitchen, she sat on the faded cushion, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Milo climbed up beside her, looking at her with the open trust only a child could give. "Are you sad?" he asked. Fiona turned to him. "A little. Do you want my lucky dinosaur? It helps when I feel weird." She took the small plastic triceratops from his hand, holding it gently. "Thanks, Mega Milo." Ian returned with 2 chipped mugs. He handed Fiona the one that didn't have the handle cracked. "You always keep your promises," he asked. "I try. You said you'd wait for me to figure this out." "I am." He sat beside her. "Then tell me what this looks like, not the fantasy, not the penthouse or the galas, just this." Fiona's voice was quiet. "It looks like waking up next to someone who doesn't care if I've signed 5 contracts that day or none. It looks like dinner at the table, even if it's just cereal. It looks like someone who doesn't change around me just because I have more money than God." Ian leaned back. "And what happens when the press finds out? When people start asking why the billionaire CEO is dating a single dad who lives above a pawn shop? Then I say it's none of their business." He laughed under his breath. "You really think it's that simple?" "No," she said. "But I think it's that worth it." They sat in silence, the rain tapping softly at the window. Milo had curled up and fallen asleep against Fiona's side, his tiny hand still wrapped around her wrist. Ian looked at her. "You're not what I expected." "I never have been." He reached over and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're not running this time." "No," she said. "But I need you to trust that I can handle this, that I can handle you." Ian's jaw tightened. "It's not about handling me. It's about letting someone in and hoping they don't leave when things get ugly." "I don't leave." He stared at her, searching for any sign that she'd flinch, look away, falter. She didn't, then he nodded. "All right." Her breath caught. "All right, what? If you're in, so am I." The relief that washed over her face wasn't dramatic. It was quiet and real, like someone who'd been holding her breath for weeks and finally exhaled. "Okay," she whispered. They stayed like that for a while, the room dim except for the glow of the streetlight through the blinds. Eventually, Ian stood and gently picked up Milo, carrying him to his room. When he returned, Fiona hadn't moved. She looked up at him. "I'm not going to pretend it'll all be easy," he said. "There'll be days I snap at you because I'm tired or scared. There'll be moments I feel like I'm drowning in everything I can't give you." She stood slowly and crossed to him. "Then we figure it out together." He nodded once. "You'll probably hate my cooking. I've eaten worse. You'll meet my sister. She's got opinions. I can handle opinions. And Milo, he'll love you, which means you can't walk away once you're in." Fiona stepped in, close enough for her voice to drop. "I'm not going anywhere, Ian." He kissed her then, not tentative, not questioning. It wasn't desperate or cinematic. It was solid, certain. A promise sealed in the soft press of lips and the quiet way her hands found his. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "You know this doesn't end with a rooftop proposal or a violin quartet, right?" She smiled. "No, then how does it end?" He looked around their small apartment. The uneven floor, the second-hand furniture, the life he'd built with his own hands, threadbare but sturdy. "It ends with you here," he said. "At our table, on our terms." Fiona leaned into him. "Then that's the only ending I want." Weeks later, they stood outside a modest brick townhouse with a yard just big enough for Milo to run in circles. The moving truck pulled away, and Ian handed Fiona a key that matched his own. She held it like it was made of gold. "I never thought I'd find home in a place like this," she said. He grinned. "You didn't. You found it in a person." She took his hand, the keys still pressed between their palms. "Then let's never lose it." And they didn't. The wind carried the scent of fresh paint and cut grass as Fiona stepped out onto the porch of the townhouse, barefoot and wrapped in one of Ian's old flannel shirts. It was early, the kind of hour when the world hadn't quite decided whether to wake up or stay asleep. Birds chirped softly from the maple tree in the front yard, and the faint hum of a neighbor's lawnmower drifted from down the block. Inside, she could hear Milo laughing giddy, unfiltered laughter that only came from a child trying to outrun bedtime or sneak extra syrup onto pancakes. Ian's voice followed, low and amused, coaxing him back to the kitchen table. Fiona sat on the steps, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Her laptop rested beside her, unopened. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't woken to a flood of emails or conference requests. She hadn't needed to. She'd made a decision. When Ian stepped outside a few minutes later, Milo trailing behind with a superhero cape dragging on the porch boards, Fiona looked up at him with a calm she hadn't known she was capable of. "I told the board I'm stepping back," she said. Ian leaned against the railing, folding his arms. "For how long? I don't know yet," she said. "Long enough to figure out what kind of life I want to build, not for the company, for me." Milo climbed into Fiona's lap, cape tangling between them. "Are you going to be home all the time now? More than I used to be," she said, brushing his hair back. Ian didn't speak for a moment. Then, "You sure you're ready for slower days and uneven floors?" She raised her eyes to his. "I'm ready for you." "That's the only thing I've ever been completely sure about." He stepped down and sat beside her, the three of them close enough to feel each other's breath. The street was quiet, and the sun had started to rise fully now, casting a soft golden glow across the front lawn. "What did the board say?" he asked. "They'll survive," she replied. "Graham wasn't happy, but I reminded him I own more than half the company." Ian chuckled. "That'll do it. I've put someone I trust in charge of the day-to-day. Someone who doesn't mind staying in the spotlight while I disappear from it." Milo squirmed in her lap and looked up at Ian. "Can we go to the park today?" Ian ruffled his hair. "After breakfast." "And only if you help clean up Syrup Mountain." Fiona leaned her head on Ian's shoulder, and they sat like that for a while, no rush, no agenda, just the warmth of a quiet morning and the closeness they'd fought hard for. Later that day, they wandered the park together. Milo darted ahead, cape flying, as Ian and Fiona walked slowly, fingers intertwined. She told him stories she'd never shared before about boarding school summers spent alone in empty estates, about a father who taught her how to read stock reports before bedtime, but never once asked if she was happy. Ian listened without interrupting. Then he told her about the first time he held Milo, how terrified and overcome he'd been all at once, how he'd sworn he'd never let his kid feel like he didn't belong. "I get it now," Fiona said. "Why you kept everything so close. Why you were scared to let me in." "I wasn't scared of you," Ian said. "I was scared of what I'd do if I lost you." She stopped walking and faced him fully, her expression open. "You're not going to lose me." He cupped her face gently. "Then marry me," her breath caught. "What? I don't have a ring yet. I don't have a plan, but I've never been more certain of anything. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want Milo to grow up knowing that love doesn't always come easy, but it's worth everything." She blinked, her bottom lip trembling. "Yes. Of course, yes." They kissed under the shade of a blooming dogwood tree while Milo shouted triumphantly from the top of the slide, completely unaware or maybe fully aware that the world had just changed again. The wedding was simple, no press, no designer gowns. Fiona wore a silk dress she found in a small downtown boutique, and Ian wore the same suit he'd worn to the gala, slightly tailored this time. They got married in the garden of their townhouse. Beneath twinkling lights, Ian and Milo had strung together the night before. Fiona's assistant, now the acting CEO, stood in the back row beside Ian's sister and a handful of coworkers from the diner. No one wore heels. No one talked about money. They just watched two people who didn't belong in the same universe find a way to share the same orbit. After the vows, Milo ran up the aisle holding a sign that read, "Finally." And the entire crowd laughed. That night, Ian surprised her. He led her up to the roof of their townhouse, where a table was set with candles and 2 plates of grilled cheese and tomato soup, her favorite from the diner. The city stretched out around them, quiet and vivid. "I know it's not Paris," he said, pulling out her chair. She took his hand and sat. "It's better." They talked for hours, until the candles burned low and Milo had fallen asleep in a nest of blankets on the couch below. At one point, Fiona looked around and said, "This doesn't feel like the end of something." Ian reached across the table and laced his fingers with hers. "That's because it's the beginning." Years passed. Milo grew taller, bolder, and his superhero drawings evolved into sketches of people who looked suspiciously like Ian and Fiona. The townhouse walls filled with them, framed and displayed like priceless art. Fiona never returned to her role full-time. Instead, she started a nonprofit that supported single parents, quietly funded by her trust, but run by people who understood the struggle firsthand. Ian helped her run it, splitting his time between that and a small mechanic shop he opened with a friend from the warehouse. They never moved into a mansion, never bought a yacht. They stayed where they were, where the floors creaked and the neighbors waved from porches. They traveled when they could: Paris, Kyoto, Vancouver. But they always returned home, where Milo's laughter echoed down the halls and the scent of grilled cheese meant love was close by. And every year, on their anniversary, Ian brought her a new charger in a ribbon-wrapped box, a small, private joke between them that never stopped making her laugh. They lived imperfectly, but they lived together, and that made all the difference.